Hi there. So this is the talk that I gave at the IPWEA conference just this month. My name is Lee Patterson. I'm a geotechnical engineer with Stantec in Dunedin, and I've been the chief drone pilot since Easter 2017. And this is my talk about, well, I think it's a pretty cool job. Stantec has been providing advice to a whole bunch of authorities around the country for probably the last decade and a half. I've been doing this work since I came to New Zealand in 2000. There was a major flood in September 2000 in central Otago, and I got a job with Opus Consultants initially, but I've been with Stantec since 2009, and I've been looking at natural hazards for the DCC, landslide monitoring for a whole bunch of different authorities, and some emergency civil disaster response as well. But it's always occurred to me that I could be doing this better. So obviously, quick brief on the talk. I'll show you how I'm now using this technology and hopefully convince you to feel the same way that I feel, which is that this is an incredibly useful tool. I've put a lot of effort into getting into this space, but it's been well worth it. It has completely changed how I do a fundamental part of my job. So I'll show you how I used to do my job. I'll show you how my job is done now. The outputs, this isn't necessarily the best medium to show you the models. The models are really good when you actually kind of get in and play with them and you're part of them. So PowerPoint presentation is probably not the best mechanism for showing you exactly what the output looks like. The benefits, I think, speak for themselves, but I'll briefly show you them at the end. And for me, change has certainly been a good thing. So this is not what the talk's going to be on, but it's a great picture and it shows you the kind of risks that we have to deal with. This was in the 2015 July rainfall event in Dunedin. We had a number of major landslides around the town. This particular one, the landslide happened in the rainfall event. It was an absolute pea super of a fog. A car came around the corner coming down the hill and drove into the hole. And the next chap followed him in the hole about 7 minutes later. Thankfully, nobody was injured. But this is a good example of the kind of first phase that we have to do, which is obviously an emergency response. Is it safe to reopen the road? In this instance, the answer is pretty obvious. We obviously have to come up with some kind of remedial solutions, some short-term advice, some medium-term advice. Ideally, though, we would get involved in looking at the resilience of an asset in advance to see whether or not we can avoid this kind of thing happening in the first place by some appropriate monitoring and some intelligent thinking before the big events happen. So traditionally, my job has involved the kind of tools that you see here, reasonably straightforward tools. I think I've still got one of these. It's a clinometer and sighting compass in a box somewhere on my desk. We can take measurements with survey staffs and a little bit of a sighting compass. We can take standard measurements. But essentially, these are all things that you do on foot. And this is classically the tools of my trade from being there. Now, the tools are a little bit shinier these days. On the right-hand side here, you can see an application on my phone which tells me angles and bearing that I'm looking at and shows me all of the geographical information for where I am. On the left, I have a screen grab from a Google Street View, which is a spherical view of the site. But it is incredibly difficult. I don't know if it's clear to you guys, but it's incredibly difficult to estimate exactly how high these slopes are, exactly what the angles are on the slopes, where there might be underhangs or overhangs, and where we have detail. It's difficult to map this in any great detail. You get a good sense of what the site looks like, but you don't get a great map out of it. And this is not my best work. It's not my worst either, but it's not my best. So this is the classic output from a geological mapping exercise on site where we go and look at the where the site can be mapped out. You can see here on the left-hand side, we've got a classic kind of dish drain with water gathering, going under a culvert. The culvert's broken. It's discharging into a landslide. It's causing a whole bunch of boggy ground. We've got some vegetation which was starting to show signs of tilting. And we've noted that it's a steep slope where it is in the grand scheme of things. And this is the kind of cross-section that I would produce. Now it's a scale cross-section nominally. I have taken measurements, but it's just a cross-section at one location. It's got some simple testing on it. We would obviously do a lot more geotechnical testing on this site, but it gives you a good idea of the topographical information gathering exercise that goes on. Now I have to put this in front of the client and get their buy-in to do a bit more work, to maybe pay for a geotechnical team to go on site and do some deeper testing, maybe do some slope modeling, actually do the next stage. And this is not always the clearest way for me to bring my clients along on the journey with me. And it became obvious to me a long time ago, actually, but more acutely recently, I guess, was that, well, this kind of measurement system has leaves a lot to be desired. When you can see that there's an obvious likelihood that if you've got heights out a little bit, or if you've got things not to scale quite right, you can very, very quickly think that you have the initial correct design, and it can be a complete design change later on when you get better information. At best, I think you might mismeasure the length of a site, but at worst you might end up with the wrong solution out of the gate and have to go back and redesign it based upon a more accurate survey, which is frustrating because a lot of the time your ability to progress the job is based upon an estimate of how much it's likely to cost to remediate, and you've got a benefit cost conversation that just can't happen early on. So traditionally it would take maybe a week to get me a surveyor on site, to get them to go and visit the site, take their measurements, and then process that into another job. It generally takes a week to arrange. It's another person for me to arrange at reasonably short notice. So I call day 0 is when I'm out on site doing my initial assessment of a site. And you can see here that it can take up to 2 weeks really to get to something where I'm confident that my design is not just going to be something that's pie in the sky. So here's the example that I'm hoping to show you today. I got a phone call on a Wednesday morning. This was back in the 2015 rainfall event, 2017 rainfall event, sorry. And I got a phone call. I set up my job safety assessment and my safety plan, headed off to site. I had the drone for a couple of months at this point, so I was getting quite comfortable with how I could use it. Spent just over an hour on site, including 15 minutes of flying the drone, taking some aerial photography. I did my standard mapping exercise where I wrote down pretty much the same kind of stuff that I just showed you earlier. I left the site. I managed to get back into the office before the end of the business day, all excited about the potential for creating a 3D model that I can communicate with the client. I set that up to process. We actually use Pix4D for our processing, which has an option for processing on the cloud so that it doesn't slow down all of our computers for a day whilst it's cranking away. And you set that off and running. So that's Wednesday. Thursday. No, it's not Thursday. It's still Wednesday. So I get an email at supper time. My wife loves it when I get emails at supper time. She's always confused as to why I'm checking my emails at supper time. But I guess it's that knowing that you've got a model in the pipeline and you want to see what that model is going to look like. You're always a little bit anxious. Have I done something wrong in the setup, or is it going to work? I wonder what it will look like. And this next couple of slides shows you the output. So this is, well, the original model was done on Skycatch. We're now using Pix4D, as I say. But here is, I guess, view 1 of the site. This is a full model that can be rotated and spun, zoomed in, zoomed out. We can take measurements from it. You can see here that we've got a fairly major slip that's come down a gully, blocked a drainage run that goes underneath just here. All of the stormwater and slop that's been on the highway has gone over the highway and washed out and undermined the road. So this was the primary reason I was asked to go out and see. You can see that the traffic management has pushed people into the outside lane to go past this debris slide from a cutting away from the shoulder, and then back around here. You can see there's another fairly decent slip that's occurring onto the road here. Now the guys have worked their bum off during the last 24 hours to get this road open to a single lane. And they're asking me, do you reckon we can go back to 2-lane operation? So, well, we'll see where my advice takes us. But that we have quite a good, an excellent way to view the site. Now, the more eagle-eyed of you will have seen this tension crack here. I don't know if you'd recognize it as a tension crack, but it's a big crack in the ground. We'll come back to that because I didn't see that on site when I was there. It was taken by the machine flying its automatic grid and taking its automatic photographs. But it may well be that we can see why we're getting a significant failure coming onto the road at this point when we realize that we have this feature back here. So we'll come back to that. And this was kind of the maximum view that I had standing beside the road. It was a closed site, so I could fly it quite quickly. Other outputs that you get a lovely ortho image. What I call the ortho is a flat plan image, and the resolution of that image is great. Even if we fly it at about 121 meters or 400 feet is the ceiling that we can fly at, we should get a pixel being approximately 3.5 centimeters across. If we fly it lower, then we get much better resolution imagery. And it's current, it's right now, it's not Google Earth from 6 months ago. This alone is an interesting enough output for us to be able to design on because this image is to scale. It's a 1-to-1 scale image if you were to drag it in to some software packages and start taking measurements of it. So now it's finally Thursday. I am writing up my report and I tell the client, no, you've made absolutely the right decision to keep the lane closed. What you can see here is a slice, a 1 meter slice through the cloud that I have deliberately viewed side on so that I can see the cross-section information. It's pretty clear to me that we have an almost vertical face for about 2.5 meters height right next to that wire rope barrier, and the outside lane is not something that should be trafficked. So I spent most of the day on and off looking for CAD resources whilst I was writing my report, and I couldn't find any in New Zealand, which is quite frustrating because you kind of know that you want to get on with detailing a solution to the client. So by late in the day, I still haven't managed to get anybody in New Zealand. I finally got a hold of a chap from our design resource in Pune in India. Like a lot of large consultancies, we run a design service in one of the many other countries around the planet. It gives us an ability to tap into a different revenue stream of staff cost rates, and it also allows us to do work in different time zones. So Pune is where we run our services, and I chat to a guy there called Sadoga. Sadoga and I have a Skype conversation. We have a conversation where we're looking at each other on video, and we can pull up the same model that I have produced and showed you, and Sadoga can look at it, I can look at it. We have a conversation about what I would like is a plan image with contours. I'd like to get a cross section, maybe even 2 cross sections cut down through the model. And what we're going to do is cut out the slip debris, reconstruct it with an engineered fill that we've drained. We have this conversation, and Sadoga says, gotcha, I'll work on that today and we'll reconvene tomorrow. So Sadoga works on it overnight in the different time zones. So the next day, on Friday, I get the black sketch that you can see here back from Sadoga. It's more or less matching what our conversation is, but I'm not obviously happy with those vertical excavation steps like that. So I discuss exactly what I think the sketch should look like. Standard iterative process from an engineer to his CAD operator helping him out. None of this is unfamiliar to engineers, but this is Friday morning. I think we're doing pretty well. So here I've skipped to Tuesday morning. Sodoga was incredibly apologetic, but he had to take a personal day on Monday, so he couldn't operate and work on this on Monday. But putting that aside, by Tuesday morning, here we are. We've got a full set of the sketches ready to build. We've got a plan image, so the contractor knows exactly where he's going to, what the work looks like. Sodoga has run up the quantities for the work. I think it was 360 cubic meters of cut to waste. This slip debris that's down at the bottom in dark grey. We knew that we needed about 462 cubic meters of fill to come in. The contractor brought in an extra 5% because you always do, and at the end of it, he's like, "Well, what do I do with my extra 5%? You guys were bang on with the measurements." So that's pretty much how we got from woe to go in what I would say was less than 5 working days, but could easily have been 3. Certainly to a draft being sent to the client. And as well as the obvious focus on the site, this is the free stuff that we talk about. We obviously had this information that came to light from the drone. Now, every time I use the drone, I see something that I haven't seen otherwise. So this is a tension crack. From the survey information that we got, we actually worked up a solution to bench this and drain it in case it looked like it was going to fail catastrophically onto the highway. Whilst we had that design in our back pocket from the survey that we carried out for the below the road feature, it was the same surface. We just monitored this and it actually settled down, and we had a pretty decent confidence that it shouldn't reactivate in any hurry unless, I guess, there's another major rainfall event. As well as that, we've got this this is a shot that I did at the end of the construction so that we could do some volumetrics confirmation to see whether or not our design matched the final constructed volumes. Pleasingly, it did, but you can see that this gully landslide is not finished. It's really not finished. It has a lot left to come from this area down here. And you can see here that there's a power pylon, which isn't that far away. So you have to question whether or not there's a resilience issue for that particular service as well. All of this is free information over and above what I could possibly have gotten from a walk around on site. But I know everybody's asked me, but you've picked the best example, Lee. You've picked the fastest example. And we're not always that quick, are we? And the answer is no. Nowadays, we're actually a bit quicker. I'm getting a little bit more comfortable working up to the CAD point, producing my own contour plots and doing stuff that means that maybe I don't have to go to ask for assistance as frequently and check for other resources. But last year, Stantec was asked to help out in the Hawke's Bay. They had a big rainfall event, probably a whole bunch of scour and drainage channels, lots and lots of flood damage. And we went out and helped them out with probably the more complicated sites. So we went out in 2 visits, 4 days for the first set of visits and 3 days for the second. And we kind of dream teamed it. We went out with a couple of young guys doing scallop penetrometer testing, one geologist doing mapping and making sure that he got the salient features looked at, and then another chap doing the flying to create the 3D models. And pretty much we did 23 sites in 7 days. And we had the models available very, very quickly for sharing with the client so that we could take them on the journey with us in terms of what we believe the solutions should be. And as much as we did need to go back and get some more physical testing done, we didn't have to resurvey these sites in order to get the geometrics complete for design. In retrospect, we probably could have maybe done a little bit of a better job on the survey because we didn't have this particular set of surveys locked in datum. They were, that's the only thing I would have changed. And that's the 23 sites, just to prove that they're on the cloud there from Pix4D. Not that you didn't believe me. Yeah, So a pretty rewarding way to spend some day. I've never worked like that before. I don't know if I'll get a chance to work like that again, but it was an interesting way to do the job. So the benefits speak for themselves. A small site, 10, 15, maybe even 20 hectares, flown at a modest height, takes about 25 minutes or one battery. Um, it's quite quick to set up in the office, irrelevant of the size of the job, really. And most of my jobs have processed overnight. Even the very big ones generally take about 12 to 24 hours to process, and I've been doing them on the cloud. Obviously, it takes more time than this if you want to go into the CAD drawings like a contour plan, and those kind of things. I think it's safe. This is a picture of me back in 2003, getting stuck up to my ears in it. Jake rescued me with a piece of plywood, but not before he'd taken a photograph of me. These two shots at the bottom are from the Graham Valley landslide in Nelson. Both are model shots. That shot on the right, this shot on the right here is not photographs. This is a real model, and these are measurements that you just couldn't take. You just couldn't take accurately at all without a modeling process. So it's incredibly easy to get good data from difficult to access environments. I think it's incredibly cost effective. We have definitely seen this technology paying for itself. I don't see it as a complete alternative to the prior survey methods that would be in use. So just to be clear, photogrammetry is taking photographs and looking at the relationship between points. So if you have 3 points and you view them from different angles, they have a spatial relationship to each other. And then from that trigonometry, we can calculate where the cameras must be positioned in order for that to be true. And we can tell you the relative geometric orientation of those points. So that is photogrammetry. The technique's been in place for a long time, 100 years plus. It's how we used to work out the height of the hills that we couldn't get to by taking measurements from different locations. Now imagine, of course, that with artificial intelligence, we can identify 2 billion points and look at the spatial arrangement of 2 billion points. Essentially, it becomes a dense surface that is like Google Earth on steroids. It looks very similar to LiDAR. LiDAR is better because it only needs to penetrate vegetation once in order to get a measurement. Because you have to have a point visible from several different locations to work out its spatial orientation. If you want to see down through vegetation, you do need to see to ground the same point from 3 shots, at least 3 shots. Traditional survey is never going to be replaced. If you want an accurate point measured through grass or to a hard point within accuracy of less than a centimeter, traditional survey staff work is always going to be the case. Like I've said, you get an incredibly dense cloud, possibly too dense. We actually have to thin it, simplify it, maybe reselect a low point for every half a meter and give that to the CAD guys so that their software doesn't fall over. But the great point about this is that you don't simply get what was selected as a feature by the surveyor on site. You get a true model, you get a true view of the site. Much more visible than everything that you'd get by foot on site. And like I said earlier, you get these unknown unknowns, or what I say is the stuff that you don't know you didn't know, and until you rock up back in the office with a model, and then you see these all the time. It makes me worry because I think, how long have I been doing this job where I haven't had the drone, and how many things have I missed that I would have seen otherwise? The virtual model is much more accessible to our clients. Maybe engineers have a good understanding of when you see a contour map, we understand that, oh, there's a hill there or there's a valley there. That's the way that the water must be flowing. So you get used to looking at a black and white contour map and maybe a cross section, and we're quite good at decoding it. Our clients are not necessarily in that headspace, so for them it's a much more immersive experience to be able to enter into a virtual space, spin it around, look at what you want to look at. A lot of the features don't need to be decoded or translated, they're simply there. It's great because you only need to visit the site once, really. I mean, there is a strong argument that you don't need to go back. You can take your reviewers with you. I had Sadoga looking at this model, and he said, before you fix that, you're gonna have to address the drainage. The drainage is too small. The inlet's going to get blocked. It's not going to work. And that was wonderful. Sadoga could give me some advice from Pune about my site. It's just great. And obviously, we've got a true model. You can take as many measurements as you want. You're not just locked into whatever measurements were taken. It does have limitations. The limitations are fairly obvious. There's still a perception that drones are being operated by rogue agents and that we are dangerous in some way. Current legislation on permissions to fly over property is a bit prohibitive. We have our Part 102, which does allow us some latitude in that. Obviously, you can't fly in any weather conditions. And as I said, comparing against LiDAR, you can't penetrate tree and bush canopy, although LiDAR is not a panacea for that either. That last point there is, like I said earlier, I wished I had done something different on site. If you are commissioning this work, I strongly recommend that you ask your supplier if they know what their accuracy is, if they know what datum the model is in, and if they can provide a report telling you and explaining how accurate the model is with some checkpoints. You don't need to know what that language means at this stage. That's probably another talk, but suffice to say, if they can't tell you how accurate it is, it's not survey, it's modeling. The model might be incredibly useful, but there is a good risk that the models without survey control can have maybe a 1% tilt or a dome or a dish. The models can be distorted in some way if they're not locked and controlled. We use arrow points for our control, and it works well as a system. I don't have to be a surveyor to use that equipment. So in my dreams, the first person that rocks up on site would be able to fly the drone sufficiently to take the right aerial imagery so that we can produce a model, even if it's not quite ideal photography, even if it's not perfect. The model is so much better than an estimate of what the site looks like. And I think that these tools are a no-brainer to take somebody with you on the site. And that basically guessing measurements is no longer acceptable. That's my take-home message. So I've got some question slides. These just show some jobs that we've been doing. This is Katiki Beach, south of Meraki on State Highway 1, where we had the state highway put at risk by coastal erosion. So we had to reinstate it and protect it. We got the volumes on all of this work right within 2%. Contractor was most impressed. This is some work that we've been doing for Auckland Transport. We have surveyed 15 at-grade crossings. We initially just wanted to get the plan image. The plan image was the only deliverable. We were going to do all of our design in 2D. Subsequent to that, we were really delighted that we had the 3D for free because we did have to have some difficulties designing access ramps for wheelchairs so that there was minimum grade, maximum grade requirements for getting up and down ramps. Obviously, you can't get that length of a ramp very accurate in just a plan image, but with the 3D imagery and details, we could get all of that stuff right. And we could look at drainage paths and make sure that we were putting new culverts in the right places and that kind of stuff. But the great part about this, of course, is that we didn't have to close or slow down any of the railways. We didn't have to have Kiwi Rail standover. They said as long as you fly a minimum of 8 meters above our infrastructure, we are happy that the safety is being thought of. And once they knew that we had drone technology, they weren't happy with us going in with traditional survey because by comparison, it's just not as safe. This one here is a pipeline in Dunedin. It's a fairly major pipeline. It's a large concrete socket and spigot pipeline that's running through a well-known landslide area. So the landslide is actually almost as wide as the photograph that's in there. This is one small internal feature here, which is putting that asset at risk. And this was used to convince the DCC that perhaps they needed to prioritize getting this changed to a different material in the long term. And this is the last example, which is Cape Kidnappers landslide, where a couple of tourists were sconed by a big 30,000 cubic meter slip that came off a 180 meter high cliff back in January. And we have been advising Hastings Council on the comparators between progressive surveys. So the surveys are all locked in the same datum, in the same location, and what we can do is overlay the surveys, photogrammetric surveys, and we believe that we can see the difference between those surfaces right the way down to anything about 10 centimeters or bigger. We reckon we're able to see with confidence if there's a stone bigger than 10 centimeters fallen from that cliff face. These slips that you're looking at here are a lot bigger than that. These are kind of 7,000 cubic meters of failures still happening since the original failure. And we've been advising the council on the ongoing nature of that site. I guess those question talks are probably examples all in their own right. I could do a talk on each one of them, but it's a good set of examples, and so that's my talk. Probably a bit longer than I spent for IPWEA, but not too bad.